Welcome to What's Up Over Edmonton for March 2024. My name is Jeff Robertson, and I'm a member of the Royal Astronomical Society of Canada, Edmonton Centre. And I posted this picture just because I thought it looked kind of neat of an airplane flying by the moon. Couldn't get the exposure quite right in the limited time I had to catch the plane by the moon, but I thought that was a neat picture. I call this What's Up Over Edmonton because the skies over Edmonton are fundamentally different than what is normally presented in popular astronomy publications like Sky and Telescope and Astronomy Magazine, and also what's presented on a lot of the media in Canada, which tends to be Toronto-centric. And this is the example I've been using forever. This is the sky over Toronto at 11 o'clock on July the 5th. And I always point to this constellation here, which is Scorpio, the Scorpion. And in Toronto, you could see the entire constellation. However, in Edmonton, the constellation Scorpio never gets completely above the horizon. All we ever see is the top part here, the head and a bit of the body. Also, it's not only what we can see, but how we see it. And this is a picture I took last February of the moon, Jupiter, and Venus. That the same night I took this picture, my wife's cousin, who is in Los Reyes, Mexico, took a picture of the same scene of the moon, Venus, and Jupiter and Venus. And you can see, while in Edmonton, they're a bit on the slant. In Los Reyes, at 20 degrees north latitude, they were almost straight line down to the horizon. So we see things differently, and we see different things in Edmonton. Most of the information I use comes out of the Observer's Handbook, which is put out every year by the RASC National, and it's 352 pages of just about anything you would want to know for the amateur observer and professional observer too. So, what do we have March 2024? Spring is in the air and soon may be joined by wildfire smoke. So Jupiter is still an appealing target this month, still well placed, but we're going to lose Jupiter fairly quickly. It's probably the last good month to see Jupiter before it gets too low. Mercury does make a short appearance at the month's end. Daylight saving time, or as one of our members, Larry Wood, used to call it, damn stupid time, begins on March the 10th. We have the vernal equinox on the 19th of March. And the zodiacal light is visible starting from March 27th to April 8th after dusk, and it is in the western evening sky. So I will start the planetarium portion of this presentation, and as always, I have pre-recorded it. So here we go. Let's look at what we can see in the skies over Edmonton for the month of March 2024. And as always, we'll start with sunrise and sunset times. So on March the 1st, the sun rises at 7:20 a.m. It sets at 6:13 p.m. for 10 hours and 53 minutes of daylight. Night begins, that is, astronomical twilight ends, at 8:09. On March 31st, the sun rises at 7:07 a.m., sets at 8:08 p.m. for 13 hours of daylight. Now, those times are Mountain Daylight Time. We've had the time change. And night begins at 10:14 p.m. Mountain Daylight Time. Let's look at the evening planets, and Jupiter has been in our skies for several months, but it is starting to be lower and lower each day. And in March, Jupiter is in the southwest sky, still visible in a telescope, giving you views of the equatorial bands, and it's for Galilean moons. On March the 1st, Jupiter is setting at 11:55 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. On the 31st, it's setting at 11:32 p.m. Mountain Daylight Time. And there they are labeled In this view here, which is on the 10th of March at 8 o'clock, you have Io and Ganymede on one side and Europa and Callisto on the other. And as I've mentioned many, many times, the moons change positions day by day. Moving further up the ecliptic, about 5 degrees, which is 3 fingers held together, held at arm's length, you come to Uranus. And there it is there. Uranus is a bluey green colored disk. You can find it in binoculars if you know exactly where to look. And if you do use Jupiter and just scan just slightly up the ecliptic, you will see this bluish disk in your binoculars. And of course in a telescope you can resolve the disk a little bit better. As I say, this representation shows it as blue, but I always see it as having a bit of a green tint to it. At the beginning of the month, Uranus sets at 12:45 a.m. and at the end of the month it is setting at 11:54 p.m. and that'll be Mountain Daylight Time. There is one more planet that can be seen in the evening sky, and that's Mercury, and it will pop into view near the end of the month. So here we are on the 17th at 8 o'clock. And Mercury makes a brief appearance. And by the 31st, it is setting at 9:50 p.m. Mountain Daylight Time. So if you have a clear horizon, you can catch a glimpse of Mercury. Neptune, which reaches conjunction on the 17th of this month, is just too close to the sun, lost in the evening twilight. In a couple more months, we're going to lose all the evening planets. We won't have any planets to look at in the evening. They'll all be in the morning sky or in conjunction with the sun. Both Jupiter and Uranus reach superior conjunction. That is, they're behind the sun from our point of view in May. Saturn and Mars are in the morning sky, but the ecliptic angle is quite low, and they are rising only about a half an hour before the sun rises by the end of the month. Like on the 31st, Saturn is rising at 6:38, Mars is rising at 6:24, and the sun is rising at 7:07. So chances of seeing either Saturn or Mars are pretty slim. You would need an exceptionally clear sky and an exceptionally flat horizon to glimpse them. They'll be higher later on in the year. And you may be asking, what about Venus? Well, Venus is so close to the sun right now, even though it doesn't reach conjunction until June. At the end of the month, Venus is rising at 6:53 a.m. And as I said before, the sun is rising at 7:07. So it's pretty much lost until it moves into the evening sky, at least from our latitude. As far as the moon goes, the morning planets are just lost in twilight, so we're not even going to bother with them. On the 13th, the moon is between Jupiter and Uranus, and on the 14th, it is passing near the Pleiades. Now, on the night of the 24th, going into the morning of the 25th, there is a penumbral lunar eclipse. And that is where the moon is going to go through the outer shadow of the Earth. So if you're standing on the moon, you would see a partial eclipse of the sun, as the Earth would cover part of the sun, but not all of it. So I'll just run this little animation here. The penumbral eclipse starts at 8:53 p.m. It reaches its maximum eclipsing at 11:12. And ends at 1:32. The effect is rather subtle. Of course, a full moon is quite bright. And when you're watching this, you'll see the brightness fade, and the moon will turn kind of a dusky gray tone to it. It isn't as spectacular as a total lunar eclipse. Now, eclipses come in pairs. When there is a lunar eclipse, either 2 weeks before or 2 weeks after that lunar eclipse, somewhere on the planet, there's going to be a solar eclipse, whether it be partial or total or annular. And I just want to talk about that because there is a total solar eclipse occurring on April the 8th. And I'll talk a lot more about that in the April What's Up. It sweeps across Mexico, up through the United States, up through Texas, and it enters Canada and goes over Hamilton, barely misses Toronto, sweeps into Quebec and into the Maritimes, and then out into the Atlantic. The path where you can see a total eclipse is quite narrow. It's only 100 or 200 kilometers wide, and a lot of our members are heading to an area where they can see this. A lot of them are going south into Texas, and that. I myself am heading east into Ontario. Too many red hats down in the States right now, particularly this year. For my tastes, I'm just not comfortable going in the U.S. right now, especially into the southern part of the United States. In Edmonton, we will see a partial solar eclipse. 23% of the sun will be blocked by the moon. It starts at 11:54. Maximum eclipse is at 12:46, and it ends at 1:39. This is on a Monday. Weather permitting, of course, the TELUS World of Science will have people out watching the eclipse, and we'll have our observatory in Coronation Park, just south of the TEWS building, open with solar telescopes, and we should have some extra solar telescopes out in the field in front of the observatory. To view a partial solar eclipse, you will need proper eyewear. You cannot look at it directly without damaging your eyes. And eclipse glasses are available for sale inside the TELUS World of Science, and I believe we'll have some that we'll just be giving away at the observatory. We had a spectacular partial solar eclipse in October, and we had about 2,500 people come out to the observatory that Saturday morning to watch that eclipse. I was there manning one of the telescopes, and then I went off and watched the Elks lose their last game of the season to the Montreal Alouettes. Daylight saving time begins on March the 10th. We spring ahead, set our clocks ahead 1 hour. So we have 1 extra hour of daylight in the evening, and the sunset is 1 hour later. The spring equinox occurs on the 19th in Edmonton at 9 p.m. And this is where the sun crosses the equator. The days and nights are almost equal, 12 hours each. And the sun rises due east and sets due west on that day. Starting on March 27th and continuing on till April the 8th, we can see the zodiacal light in the west after sunset. This is a phenomenon that you need to be away from the city lights. You have to be in a dark sky. So if you're in Edmonton, head out down Highway 16 toward Wabamun, and you can see the zodiacal light. It is sunlight shining on dust along the plane of the solar system, and it appears as a yellowy gray light that rises from the horizon, and if you're in very dark skies, goes all the way up to the zenith, and it forms kind of a pyramid. So that is something you can look for at the end of the month. Comet 12P Pons Brooks is still in our sky. It has faded quite a bit, and through the month it is making its way through the constellation Andromeda. And it is in the northwest sky, and heading south now by the end of the month. It's pretty low in the west-northwest sky. So let's look at some of the things we can see in the skies over Edmonton in the month of March. And I've set the time for 11 o'clock on in the middle of the month, on the 15th, the Ides of March. So if we look north and we look straight up, we see Ursa Major, which includes the Big Dipper, almost directly overhead. And folklore tells us that the rains that come in the spring pour out of the dipper because it is straight overhead, and the waters are emptying out of the bowl of the dipper. And if we look down near the horizon, we see that Cassiope, big W or M, depending on how you look at it, is getting pretty low to the horizon. As the months progress, it will be fairly low at this same time, and then will start to climb up again as the dipper comes down on the other side. And of course, the two pointer stars here point directly to Polaris, the North Star. Now, if we look at the handle of the dipper, specifically the middle star of the handle, through binoculars, or if you have exceptional eyesight, you'll see that it's actually two stars. The two stars that make up Mizar are roughly 78 to 80 light years away, and they are a true binary system. That is, they are gravitationally locked together and they revolve around a common center of mass. While we're in the region of Mizar and the handle of the dipper, keep an eye out for this guy here, M51, the Whirlpool Galaxy. It's a favorite target of astrophotographers. And in a mid to large size scope, it shows up as a classic spiral galaxy, and it's actually tearing apart a satellite galaxy, this guy right here. And if we follow the arc of the handle, it points down to the very bright star Arcturus, which is now up above the horizon at this time of day. During the winter, Arcturus doesn't show itself in the evening sky, but through spring, summer, and fall, Arcturus will be in the sky. It is one of the brightest stars in the summer sky, and one of the first stars to become visible after sunset. And if you follow this same line from Arcturus, you spike down to Spica, which is a bright star in the constellation of Virgo. A couple months ago, the bright star Capella was almost directly overhead, but it is starting to move off. By the time June and July arrive, Capella will be very low in the northern sky. To find it, follow the top two stars of the bowl of the dipper, and it will point directly at Capella. Closer to the horizon in the north, the bright star Vega and Deneb, which form part of the summer triangle, are hanging low on the northeast horizon at this time of year. They will eventually rise very high in the sky, and Deneb in a few months will be almost directly overhead, its constellation Cygnus the Swan. Looking to the south, we are about done with Orion. March is the last good month to view Orion, because as the sun setting later and later, Orion just simply vanishes from sight until it reappears again in the evening sky next winter. But of course, Orion is a favorite target of lots of people. It has those four bright stars that form its corners, and the three bright stars across its belt, and of course it has the Orion Nebula, and there it is there. And high overhead in the constellation Cancer is M44, the Beehive Cluster, which is a great open cluster. It looks great in binoculars, looks better in a wide field telescope, and is a frequent host of planets and moons that pass by or even pass through the cluster. And speaking of clusters, let's not forget the brightest open cluster, M45, or the Pleiades. It's a cluster of newly formed stars, about 400 light years from Earth, and in a dark sight it is very, very obvious. It looks like a little cloud. Sometimes people describe it as thinking it's the Little Dipper, but because it does have that kind of shape. But no, that's an open cluster that is the Pleiades. And I think I will leave it at that. Next month, we can talk about some of the galaxies that are in the constellation Virgo, which is home to lots and lots of galaxies. But for now, I'll leave it there and ask if there are any questions. So, are there any questions?
Is there any relationship between the zodiac light finishing on April 8th and that being the date of the eclipse?
Well, it's the date of the new moon for the eclipse. It's just when the moon starts showing up in the sky, it kind of washes it out. That's why you have to go to a very dark site.
Oh, okay.
You see it when there's no moon in the sky.
Okay.
So in the spring, it's in the west, and in the excuse me, in the fall, in September, and it's in the morning sky. And it's been referred to as the false dawn in the springtime because it rises up before the sun does. So that's why. It's just so the moon doesn't wash it out. Okay. And I did talk a little bit about, well, I talked a lot about the solar eclipse, and I'll talk a lot about that more next month because it's kind of a big deal. It's the last solar eclipse in Canada for quite a while. There will be one in Edmonton in 2044, but I probably won't be around to see it. But anyway, okay, if there's nothing else, we'll move on to the moon.
What do you see when you look at the moon? When it's full and round, do you see a balloon? Does it look like a cookie with the bite taken out? What do you see when you look at the moon? It follows a path every month of the
Okay, third quarter is on March the 3rd. The moon is new on March the 10th. And that following day, when the crescent moon appears, is the beginning of Ramadan, the holy month of Ramadan for those who follow the Islamic faith. March 16th is first quarter. And then March 25th is the full moon. And it is also the penumbral eclipse is happening. Well, for us, the night of the 24th and morning of the 25th. It's also the first full moon after the spring equinox, which means the next Sunday after the full moon is when we have Easter, and that's how it's determined. Full moon in March is known as the worm moon, presumably because worms are starting to come out of the ground after winter. It's also known as the crow moon, the snow crust moon, the sap and sugar moon, the maple sugar moon, the Lenten moon, obviously referring to Easter, the wind moon. I remember when I was a kid, springtime was a great time to fly kites, and the plow moon. Farmers hit the fields to prepare their fields to sow their crops. I usually pick a feature out of the Explore the Moon certificate program for binoculars or telescope that is put out by the RASC. And I have picked a feature this month called the Altae Scarp, or Rupus Altae, I should say. And this is one of my very poor pictures of the moon. The scarp is right there, and it's a long curving feature that is formed from the shock waves of the impact that created Mare Nectaris, or the Sea of Nectar, right there, some 3.9 billion years ago. And that impact compressed the surrounding terrain into a series of outwardly expanding rings, and the scarp is a portion of one of those rings. It's best seen 5 to 6 days after new moon. Altai Scarp is 427 kilometers long and up to 1 kilometer high. And this is a blow up of that previous picture taken about 5.5 days after new moon. And that line marks where the scarp is here. And you can see the curve of the scarp. The scarp is easy to find if you look for a chain of 3 prominent craters, Theolopolis, Cyrillus, and Katharina. So those are there. And the Altai Scarp starts near the 101 kilometer wide crater Katharina, and it runs in a broad curve from the upper left to the lower right. And it ends near the 88 kilometer wide crater Pictolemy, which features a nice central peak, which my bad imaging even captured. As the sun angle gets higher and shadows shrink, the feature all but disappears. When the moon is full, it's almost impossible to see. However, between days 18 and 20 after new moon, when the sun is illuminating it from the other side, as is shown in this picture, the scarp does become easier to spot again. So that is the Altai Scarp, easily seen in a small telescope and steadily held binoculars if you look for it at the right time. For the constellation, we're going to go with Gemini, the twins, and this is the star field it resides in. There's the astronomical drawing. And this is a classical drawing of what the ancients thought they were seeing. Gemini lies along the ecliptic, so it's one of the zodiac constellations. In astrology, these signs relate to when the sun is within the constellation borders. So those who collect or consult the horoscope in the paper, see what their future is, they'll see that Gemini, you're a Gemini if you're born between May 22nd and June 21st. However, in actual fact, the sun is in Gemini June 21st to July 19th. So unless you were born on June 21st and have Gemini tattooed on your arm, maybe you should go see a plastic surgeon. The constellation of Gemini is made up of the 2 twins, Castor and Pollux. And in Greek mythology, Castor was the mortal son of King Tyndareus, while Pollux was the immortal son of Zeus. Both Castor and Pollux, being identical twins, were inseparable. Castor was a great horseman, and Pollux was a great fighter, and together they went with Jason on the Argo in search of the Golden Fleece. Later during the Trojan Wars, Castor was killed in battle, and Pollux pleaded with Zeus to bring him back, and Zeus agreed if they both spend half their time on Earth and the other half amongst the stars in the heaven. And since then, when sailors saw the 2 stars together, they knew their journey would be prosperous. However, seeing only one star foretold bad luck. And there are the 2 stars there, using Orion as a pointer through from Rigel through the belt, points to Gemini. So there are the 2 stars, Castor and Pollux, and both stars are easily seen even in the city. Castor and Pollux. And this is a photo of the 2 stars. Castor's on the left, Pollux is on the right. Castor is a blue main sequence star, about 2.7 times more massive than our sun. In a small telescope, it can be split into a double star, and it is actually a 6-star system, approximately 51 light years away. Pollux is a red giant star, much older than Castor, nearing the end of its life, and it is 9 times the diameter and 2.5 times the mass of our sun. It does have at least one confirmed planet, more than twice the mass of Jupiter, orbiting it. And it's pretty close to us. It's only 34 light years away. And this is a comparison showing our sun in comparison. Gemini contains a few deep sky objects that one can see in a mid-sized telescope, so I highlighted two. And the first one is Messier 35. It's the only Messier object in Gemini. It's a cluster consisting of several hundred stars, has an apparent magnitude of 5.3, and it is approximately 2,800 light years from Earth. It also has the designation NGC 2168 in the new general catalog. There's also NGC 2392, known as the Clown Nebula, also known as the Eskimo Nebula. It's a planetary nebula that was discovered by William Herschel in 1787. And there it is there. And here's a view through an amateur telescope. It's composed of outer layers of a sun-like star in the latter stages of its life. NGC 2392 lies about 6,500 light years away, and it shines at magnitude 10. It's visible in a small telescope. And there's a more detailed view. I think that's a Hubble view, actually. Of course, to our eyes, it would not have all these colors. It would be only shades of gray. So we'll go on to space history. And this is where we look at a past event that not only occurred this month, but whose anniversary year is divisible by 5. So in 2024, we look at events in the years ending in 4 or 9. Now, I've said a few times before that when I do a deep dive to find a story that finds the anniversary criteria set up for this segment, I sometimes have stories that fall like manna from heaven, and sometimes I can't find anything. I really have to dig around for something. So this month I found several, but tonight I'll pick just 2. Both of these remind me just how old I am, because I remember both of them very well. And the first one is from half a century ago. This is the spacecraft Mariner 10. The spacecraft in the Mariner program had been the first to successfully explore Venus, which was Mariner 2, and Mars, Mariner 4. Mariner 9 was the first craft to orbit another planet, which was Mars. Mariner 10, shown here in the clean room, was the last spacecraft to carry the Mariner name and the first to visit Mercury. It weighed 503 kilograms at launch, was solar powered, and was 8 meters across its solar panels. And its 8-sided instrument bus in the center there was 1.39 meters across. Mariner 10 carried 6 scientific instruments: an infrared radiometer, an ultraviolet air glow spectrometer, an ultraviolet occultation spectrometer, a magnetometer, charged particle telescope, plasma analyzer, and 2 cameras. It communicated primarily through its high-gain antenna. And it was launched November 3rd, 1973, on an Atlas Centaur rocket from Cape Canaveral. And as it headed away from Earth toward the inner solar system, it looked back and took this image of the Earth-Moon system. Now, even though its primary mission was to explore Mercury, the first planet it encountered was Venus on February 5th, 1974. Mariner 10 flew past Venus, took some readings, but primarily it flew past Venus to use its gravity to adjust its course onto Mercury. Now, this is the flight path of Mariner 10. After swinging past Venus in February, it made 3 flybys of Mercury. And the first was 50 years ago, on March 29th, 1974. It passed 704 kilometers from the planet. In September of that year, it flew again past Mercury at a distance of 48,000 kilometers. And finally, on March of 1975, it skimmed just 327 kilometers above the planet. Now, you can see as it encounters Mercury, it encounters it at the same place in its orbit all three times. And as a result, it can only image one side of the planet, the side that was being lit by the sun. The other half was in darkness. Now, I had a game, Microsoft Space Simulator, which was a DOS game that came out in 1994. If I remember, it was on 3 floppy disks. And when you went to Mercury, half of it had the features mapped by Mariner 10, and the other half was just a gray mass because we didn't know. Oh, get somebody else coming in. We didn't know what the other half of the planet looked like because, well, we couldn't see it. It was in darkness every time Mariner 10 swung by. So this is Mercury, as Mariner 10 saw it, a heavily cratered world with old impacts as well as new ones with distinct ray patterns. And that's another view. And this is a composite image of one hemisphere of the planet. It was very moonlight in appearance, but without the big Maria or seas. It looked more like the far side of the moon. As Mercury is the smallest planet in the solar system, scientists were surprised when the spacecraft's magnetometers revealed a very weak magnetic field, and this meant that Mercury must have a massive iron core. Temperature readings showed a nighttime temperature of minus 183 degrees Celsius and a maximum daytime temperature of 187 degrees Celsius. An occultation experiment as the craft crossed behind the night side of the planet showed no atmosphere. It returned 2,700 images of Mercury. Running low on fuel to maintain its attitude, the mission was ended on March 24th, 1975, and Mariner 10 remains in orbit around the sun to this day. The Mariner 10 mission had several firsts. Among these were the first spacecraft to study Mercury, the first spacecraft to use gravity of one planet, in this case Venus, to reach another. First time a gravity assist was done. The first mission to explore 2 planets, Mercury and Venus, during a single mission. First spacecraft to use gravity assist to change its flight path, and the first spacecraft to return to its target after initial encounter. Now, a more detailed study of that planet would have to wait more than 35 years for the Messenger spacecraft to fly by and eventually go into orbit around the planet in 2011. And we now have a full picture of Mercury thanks to the Messenger mission. There is another mission from the European Space Agency on its way to Mercury, and it will reach it, I think, in 2027. Getting to the inner solar system is kind of hard, especially if you want to orbit something as close to the sun as Mercury. You have to use a lot of gravity assists, and this European spacecraft is using gravity assists from Venus and the Earth to slow it down enough to go into orbit around Mercury. So I said I had 2 stories, so let's go to the second one. And in May of 1961, with 15 minutes of manned spaceflight under their belt, President Kennedy tasked NASA with landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth, and doing it by the end of the 1960s. And the project to do this was named Apollo. Now, at the time, the conventional wisdom was to use the direct descent method of getting to the moon. And direct descent involved using a giant rocket to send a large spacecraft to the moon where it would land and return. Another method proposed was called the Earth Orbit Rendezvous method, where a number of smaller rockets would be used to assemble the same large spacecraft used in direct descent to fly the mission. A third method, not really taken seriously at the time, was called lunar orbit rendezvous, where 2 smaller spacecraft would be launched a single rocket. One would be a mothership. The second was a smaller craft that would make the actual landing, return to the mothership, after which it would be discarded while the mothership returned to Earth. In 1962, NASA chose lunar orbit rendezvous as the way they would use to get to the moon. So RFQs, requests for quotation, were sent out to build the spacecraft to various aviation companies. North American Aviation would build the Apollo Command Service Module, and Grumman Aircraft would build the lander, the lunar module, or simply LEM. LEM was a two-stage affair, a descent stage to land on the moon with an ascent stage to lift off and rendezvous. And this is the initial proposal model put forth by Grumman, but the lunar module went through several changes before the final design came up. The initial model had 5 legs and also had large windows and seats for the astronauts where they would sit in like a helicopter. But of course, this design would change. Weight was always an issue, so the windows were shrunk to small triangles. The astronauts would stand in harnesses when flying the lunar module, and the descent stage would now have 4 legs. And in this mock-up, the ascent stage was symmetrical because aircraft have to be symmetrical. But again, to save weight, we come to this. The second docking port on the front was dropped. The ascent stage became asymmetrical to adjust for the different weights between the fuel on one side and the oxidizer on the other. So they would just offset the one tank to make sure that the center of gravity of the ascent stage would be proper. And to further reduce weight, layers of Kapton and Mylar were used as insulation instead of metal plates. The design was frozen in 1963, and an unmanned test flight, Apollo 5, was flown in 1968, but the lunar module had yet to fly with a complete Apollo spacecraft on a Saturn V moon rocket. So this was the mission of Apollo 9, the first all-up test of Apollo hardware, and it would be carried out in Earth orbit. The crew were left to right: Mission Commander Jim McDivitt, veteran of Gemini 4, Command Module Pilot Dave Scott, veteran of Gemini 8, and Lunar Module Pilot Russell Schweigert, who was a rookie, and his nickname was Rusty for his red hair. It would be the first time since the flights of Gemini 6 and Gemini 7 that 2 spacecraft would be operating at the same time. So the craft, when the craft separated, they would be given call signs. Command Service Module was given the name Gumdrop because when McDivitt saw the spacecraft prior to stacking, in this picture here, it was still wrapped in a blue plastic to protect it during shipping, like a piece of candy. The lunar module was named Spider due to its bug-like appearance. On March 3rd, 1969, 55 years ago, the Saturn V rocket lifted off with Apollo 9 into a near circular orbit. The lunar module is located at the top of the 3rd stage, protected by 4 panels. It's kind of right up here, right below the CSM. The command module separated from the 3rd stage of the Saturn, and the protective panels were jettisoned, exposing the lunar module. After docking, the lunar module was extracted from the 3rd stage, and over the next 2 days, they performed several burns of the service module engine to check the integrity of the spacecraft interface. The 2 spacecraft docked together to make sure, the firing wasn't going to wreck anything. Make sure it wouldn't affect the mass of the lunar module, and there were no issues. On the 3rd day, the astronauts donned their pressure suits. McDivitt and Schweikert entered the lunar module and sealed the hatch. Scott also sealed the command module docking hatch. And Schweigert would test the personal life support system, or PLIS, backpack the astronauts would wear on the moon. Both spacecrafts were depressurized. Schweikert exited the lunar module through the front hatch, and this would be the first and only test of the suit and Bliss in space prior to Apollo 11. Scott opened the command module hatch and positioned himself in the opening to photograph Schweikert. So the previous picture was a picture that Scott took, and this is a picture Schweikert took of Scott taking his picture. On that day, they also tested the lunar module descent engine while still attached to the command service module to verify it was working. And that information gained valuable that information gained while firing. The lunar module engine still attached to the CSM proved very useful a little over a year later during the flight of Apollo 13. On the fifth day of the mission, March 7th, came the big test. Spider would separate from the command module and fly on its own. With McDivitt and Schweikert in the lunar module, Scott in the command modules, separation of the two spacecraft took place. The lunar module descent engine was used for several firings and orbital insertion maneuvers, and it moved about 120 kilometers away from the mother ship. Now, the lunar module was designed only to fly in space. It could not re-enter the Earth's atmosphere. If they couldn't get back to the command module, it would not be a good day for the two astronauts inside. It was it had no heat shield, had nothing like that. So, but now it was time to return. So the ascent engine was fired and separated from the descent stage. As the descent stage fell away, McDivitt noted burn marks from the RCS engines. There are these guys here on the corners here on the insulation of the descent stage. So plume deflectors would be added, and they would first be used for the flight of Apollo 11 and were used on all subsequent lunar modules. The astronauts initiated a rendezvous and docking maneuver, which took about an hour before Spider was within 30 meters of the command service module. And there's a picture of the CSM taken from the lunar module. McDivitt and Schweikert transferred to the mothership, closed the lunar module off. Scott reinstalled the command module docking hatch, and the two spacecraft separated 3 hours later. The lunar module ascent stage was later fired for 362 seconds to propellant depletion and was placed in an exaggerated elliptical orbit. I would think it's probably re-entered the atmosphere by now, but the remainder of the mission was devoted to further firings of the engine, tracking exercises, photography, experiments, and other duties. And on March 13th, Scott performed the last service propulsion engine firing and initiated the return to Earth. They then separated from the service module, and the command module gumdrop splashed down in the Atlantic Ocean northeast of Puerto Rico. There was going to be one final test before a landing would be attempted, but that story is for another time. So Heavens Above is a great source of information. It shows what comets are visible in the sky. You can print custom sky maps for your location for whatever time you want, whatever date. It also shows satellite tracking information if you want to track the International Space Station or any of the other satellites that are flying around up there. The next What's Up is on Wednesday, April the 3rd, 2024 at 7:30 Mountain Daylight Time. The next meeting of the RESC Edmonton Center is on Monday, March 11th, again at 7:30, and it is held in the Ziedler Dome in the TELUS World of Science, or you can join us online on Zoom. The link will be on our website. And with that, I will say thank you. And if there are any questions, comments, rotten tomatoes, I will take them now. Oh, thank you very much. See a comment down there. We got just watching from my workstation. Okay, thanks, Jeff. Thank you. Yeah, interesting. Yeah, thanks everyone for the kind words. Any questions, comments? Just unmute yourself. Oh, I see Murray Hunt's joined. Hi, Murray.
Hey, Jeff, finally made it to a live one.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome.
It was good.
Hope you're doing good.
Thank you.
Anything else? Okay, this has been recorded. I will post it on our YouTube channel in a day or two. Clean up the mistakes, clean up that last slide. And yeah, so thanks very much, everyone, for stopping by. And have a pretty good crowd tonight. And hopefully we'll see you again next month on April the 3rd.